I'm Mario Martinez Jr., CEO and founder of Vengreso, and we are the creators of flymessage.io, the free personal writing assistant and text expander application. On each episode of this podcast, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you grow your sales numbers at scale. So, get your pen and paper or iPad and keyboard and start taking notes as you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Modern Selling Podcast. And I bring you a brand new topic that we've never talked about on the Modern Selling Podcast, 270 episodes. And I'm shocked that I've actually never spent some time off of winning RFPs and RFIs and RFQs. Then I have with me my friend, Mr. Mark Schreiner. He is the CEO and co-founder of MemoQ RFP. Mark, welcome to the show, my man.
Hey, Mario. Thank you so much for inviting me on. And I got to say, I really love your enthusiasm. It's very much infectious. So, hey, thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. Now, you also have another podcast yourself called the Grow Fast Podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, the Grow Fast Podcast. And we just talk to sales and marketing experts about how, mostly small, medium-sized, but also enterprise companies can grow their business fast. So we talk to people like you in terms of, sales techniques, trainings, tools. We talk to marketing experts, and once in a while, we actually even have an RFP specialist who will come on and talk.
Very cool. So if you are listening to the Modern Selling Podcast, go out and check the Grow Fast Podcast. And I think I have been or I'm about to be on that show, one of the two.
Oh, you were on, and you talked quite a bit about tools, including Text Expander and flymessage.io, which, by the way, is a great platform, a great productivity enhancer. And I personally think that the more I use the tools like that tool and other tools, it's like after a while you start to develop all these different ideas of, wow, I could use it here, but maybe I can use it over there, and then it just kind of starts to snowball after a while. So thank you for that.
So much cool product technology that can be designed and developed in one little tool, which is great. Do me a favor, tell all of our listeners a little bit about your background, and then I've got a special question for you as well.
Okay. I'm Mark Schreiner from Seattle, Washington, born and raised here. Did spend off and on about 20 plus years in Asia, mostly in leadership roles, country manager, Korea, regional sales manager based in Hong Kong, and then CEO Asia Pacific, managing director Asia Pacific, roles like that. Throughout my career, I've really kind of, been more on the business development and growth side. And in 2012, I started a consulting company in Japan that was basically helping companies come to Asia. Worked with about 15 different companies since then, and then worked with a couple of Asian companies and helped them come to North America. Moved back to the States in 2017, and again, I was consult with usually two to three different companies at once, always on the business expansion side. And in about 4 years ago, I started working with a company called MemoQ. It's a software provider based in Budapest. They're a global company though, and they asked me to help them expand in a couple of different markets, but also look at their RFP process, because for a lot of small and medium-sized companies, responding to RFPs, and we'll get into that a little bit later, can be very problematic. We were able to kind of develop a very good process, but also use some of their existing technology to make the response process much more efficient. And then the owners of that company decided they wanted to productize the technology we've been using. They invested in another entity, a US-based entity called MemoQ RFP, and they asked me to come in as co-founder and CEO, and so that's what I do. And we're out, constantly talking to head of sales, CFOs. For typically, we target small and medium-sized businesses, basically to help them kind of create a more efficient response process and win more RFPs. And as part of that role, I also have the Grow Fast podcast, because we're talking to that same audience. I guess we can announce this right here. We're in the middle of a rebrand right now, and we have a soft launch, and our new brand is Breeze. And if you go to breezedocs.ai, you can learn all about Breeze and how it can help companies. Again, not to sound too much like an infomercial here, but but you respond to RFPs, RFIs, security questionnaires, and any type of business questionnaire that where you have to, it's kind of that repetitive effort. I mean, similar in fact, in theory to Fly Message IO and Text Expander, but at a document level. And some of these documents go on for, 50, 60 pages, and you don't want to have to redo that every other day.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, the joys of RFPs. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have actually not answered an RFP in 7 years. I have chosen to disengage with anybody who wants to send me an RFP or an RFI or RFQ. I think that's silly when it comes to sales training and previously sales training for Vengreso. And I was like, there's many more opportunities where I don't have to do that. So, but I can tell you that when I was in the global accounts, when we had the large Chevrons, the Wells Fargos, the big monster accounts, and I managed $300 million a year and a sales organization there, we had RFPs and RFIs and RFQs all the time. And it was just a bear, man. It was just a bear. In fact, we had an entire RFP team that we had, and they would go through and they would help you answer by taking the standard boilerplate questions that they had, and then the copy and paste the answers in and the formatting, and it was a lot. It gives me heart palpitations thinking about it.
It's a common response, and you worked for a very large organization at that time, and so you could have a RFP team, and you might have RFP writers, you might even have some kind of technology or tools more advanced than copy and paste, maybe. But for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, they don't have the resources to have a quote dedicated team. And so they're kind of in a similar situation to you, is where they're like, okay, do we do this or not? Because every time you spend, your time and effort on something, there's an opportunity cost to that you cannot be outreaching to potential customers that you can close in person, for example. So one of the most important aspects of the RFP process is that whole go, no-go decision. Do we do this or not? And even that can be, because you might have 6, 7 different stakeholders or subject matter experts, then you have to take a look at this. And even just getting to the go, no-go requires an investment of time and analysis, right? So you're not alone. It is challenging.
Yeah, and I definitely, as a small business, if someone can make it way easier for me to be able to do that, then I might engage on that. But, I just don't have the 15, 20 hours to invest in these types of things. It's a lot for someone like myself. So that's why I'm very curious for this discussion, whether it's a small business or even the large enterprise as well. But before we get into some of that content, do me a favor. And I've got a question that I ask all my guests, and that is, tell us something nobody knows about you, even if they're looking at any or all of your social profiles. And Mark, I'm looking for something juicy, my man. I know you're probably hiding something, so I'm looking for something juicy.
I'm an open book. There's I think I probably put too much stuff on social, so there's not that much stuff that people don't know about me. But here's the thing. Back in 1989, I had been living in Maui for a year, working on a dive boat and having a lot of fun, and was going to return to the university after a year. And I decided to take a 1-month trip to Asia. And I got one of those tickets that stopped in like 5 different countries. It looks like you have a picture of Thailand in your background there. Is that Thailand?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was on the itinerary. And I got to got my ticket, got everything set my passport, and I literally had $117, and I had a ticket to go around Asia for 1 month, and I had no idea how I was going to do it, but I was just going to try to figure it out, right? And that 1 month trip soon turned into or eventually turned into 4 years, and I went over and I got a job teaching English. And after about 6 months, I decided I wanted to go more into business, got a job with a computer magazine. And then that company, which was in Taiwan, wanted an open office in Korea. And I'd spent 6 months in Korea. And I said, I will go there and do sales for you. And that was my first start in sales, was working for a Taiwanese computer magazine publisher, publishing in English. And they wanted to sell in Korea, and I did it. So it started with $117 and turned into 4 years and got me in that sales kind of track. So there, I said it. Was that juicy enough?
That's actually quite an interesting story. First off, I would never be brave enough I'm the type of guy that I can't make the move without knowing the plan. So I commend you because those have just it's like pure. I'm doing it. I'm going. I'll figure it out. And you were okay with it. Like that would absolutely drive me bananas.
So let me tell you like one little tidbit of that story. I had no idea. There was no internet back then, right? We had a book called The Lonely Planet, which was like a backpacker's guide around Asia. And my first stop was Korea. Now I'm coming from Maui in January, going to Korea in January, which I had no idea. It was so darn cold there. And I did, after living in Hawaii for a year, I had no warm clothes. I had one long sleeve shirt. I take the bus from the airport into downtown because there's supposed to be this little inn there that I can stay in for, like $5 a night or whatever. But I'm freezing. I'm putting socks on my hands to stay warm. And I'm looking around and there's nothing's in English. And this was before Korea had really modernized. And I see one Caucasian or Western looking person and I went running up to him and it's like, hey. And I'm sure it freaked him out. And I was like, I need help. And I was showing the place I was looking for. And he was kind enough to walk me over and basically saved me. Cause I was like, the sun was going down. It's really cold and I have no idea where I'm going to stay. Right. So it was pretty crazy.
Brave, man, brave. I'm telling you.
Or stupid. I don't know.
No, well, obviously it worked out. You made it happen. That's pretty awesome though. I love hearing stories like that because I just know me personally, I'm just like not the type of guy that's gonna do something without a plan. And I've never been brave enough nor have enough courage to do something like that. And so I actually love living life vicariously through people like you.
Well, I think you're pretty brave too. I mean, you launched a company. So, that takes a lot of confidence, of course, planning, but, the best laid plans. Things always change, as you know, right? So
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And that is true because I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. Any case, let's get into some meat and talk about RFPs, RFQs. They were my nemesis for many years, and I hated doing them. Good news is of all the RFPs that I ever did, we won every one of them. And so I had 100% close ratio with RFPs and RFQs. And it wasn't because of the RFP process. It was because of all the relationship building process that happened on the outside of things, which I think a lot of people forget about. Now, I'm not going to spoil the content here, but let's first talk about, define for me an RFP, RFI, the questionnaires, DDQs. I don't even know what that acronym stands for. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure, due diligence questionnaires, but I'll come back to that. So, anytime you hear an RF, it's a request for, right? And RFP would be request for proposal, RFI is a request for information, RFQ, request for quote. The lion's share of the requests come out as RFPs, so request for proposals. Typically, a large organization that wants to buy a product or service at an enterprise level, they could just reach out to a company or a sales organization could reach out to them and sell it to them. Oftentimes they're required though, large organizations and a lot of governmental organizations are required to put a tender out, which is they'll send out a document and say, we're going to buy coaching services, for example. And they will say, describe your organization, what's your training like, what are the costs? And when it comes to technology and tools, they're going to ask about your security, your technology, your platform, so on and so forth. That process, some of those RFPs can be, 50 to 100 pages long. And the challenge is, as you've kind of alluded to earlier, is you get these questions, these questionnaires, and you have to, write everything out. But it's not just you, because it'll have company information, financial information, security information. So you need to involve several different subject matter experts. And that takes their time and effort. And they're not necessarily, all those people aren't motivated by sales. They're not rewarded based upon the sales number, right? They're rewarded on doing their job. And so you're asking them to help you. And oftentimes you'll go back like a month later and they'll have the similar questions. So for example, when was a company founded? It could be, when was a company established? When was it created? That's a very simplistic example, but there's many ways to word similar questions. And so they're sitting there like, I just answered this before. Why do I have to redo this? And so it can be a kind of a repetitive and time-consuming process.
No doubt. In looking at some of the challenges that SMBs and enterprise have responding to these types of document requests, you've identified clearly the major one, which is a repository, like being able to respond to them in repetitive types of discussions. What are some of the other challenges, though, that organizations have in responding to these types of document requests?
Well, the first step is deciding, should we do this or not? Okay. And so imagine you get a 100-page document, and you're the sales VP of sales, and you're like, do I want to spend the time to read through this 100-page document? And by the way, there's a lot of information from these other departments that I'm not sure about. And some of those might be critical factors. We will only buy from organization, for example. And he's like, okay, so where are we at with our SOC 2 compliance? And you got to kind of talk to your security experts. There's insurance requirements that you have to talk with your CFO about. So getting all the understanding what the requirements are, and then checking to see whether or not you can meet those requirements, can be very, very challenging. And then there's the issue of just that repetitive work, even just simply having a process. If this subject matter expert is not available, then who's the next one in line, right? And creating kind of pools of subject matter experts. So those are some of the main challenges. Oftentimes, organizations also, they think that we'll just fill out the questionnaire and send it in. And I think you touched on this, that it's really important to kind of develop, in parallel with doing the questionnaire, to develop a relationship with the customer. Ask questions, ask clarification questions. Try to get them on a phone call. I mean, I think that's kind of like sales 101, is get the meeting, right? Because if you don't get the meeting and you just submit your completed questionnaire, you're just a pile of papers. You're just a name, right? You really want to try to develop kind of an interaction with them. See that these are your requirements. Are they all equally important, or is there something here that is just a must-have? Ask those kind of questions, and don't be afraid to do that. Does that make sense?
Totally. You mentioned something about when you get these RFPs, RFQs, your job is not just to answer as a seller, as a sales team, not just to answer the questions and submit the RFP back, but the selling process actually happens as you start surrounding all the potential buying influencers. And I'm curious, I've had this happen like umpteen number of times, where you get the RFP and it says, "Thou shalt not communicate with anybody else but procurement." And this is your point of contact. Do not reach out to anybody else. And then they usually do like that big kickoff meeting where they, host a series of folks, and then they have, let's just say it's for networking services, right? Then they'll have the VP of network that comes in and he gives you his vision, and then they'll have this person and that person and this person. So you can start figuring out who all some of the players are. And even if they don't do a big meeting, you can easily figure out who the players are based upon the purchasing requirements and the departments and those types of things. But so my question is do you have any advice for sales organizations when you receive these RFPs that says, "Thou shalt not communicate with anybody else but global procurement"? Do you follow that? Do you listen to that? Or do you start running sales campaigns with everybody that you know that you should be running a sales campaign with?
So, and I think that's a great question. And I also think it's very nuanced in terms of how you respond to it, because some organizations will just put that in there, but they don't really enforce it. And if you've got existing relationships with that organization, it's kind of hard for you to say, I'm not going to reach out to this person, even though we've done business together in the past. Typically what I would do is, if I have existing relationships, I would just let them know as a sign of courtesy, "Hey, by the way, we've been asked to participate in this RFP." And just see what their response is, because often they'll be like, "Yeah, this is a great opportunity. We think you guys are really aligned," or they might be really tight-lipped about it, right? And so I think you have to do a little bit of like probing to see, what their tolerance is in terms of, talking about it. But to take a step back, I mean, one of the most effective things you can do is is to actually help that organization create their RFP, because just like we feel on the response side that it's challenging and time consuming, on their side, where they've got to actually draft an RFP. Now, imagine you're in procurement and you've been tasked with creating an RFP about a software product that manages translation projects. You don't know that much about it. So what do you have to do is you have to like talk to to the buying part of the organization, the stakeholders there, and find out what they want. But again, they're not going to write that for you. So a lot of times they'll reach out to, vendors that they've used in the past, or they might be aware of, or vendors who reach out to them, and they'll say, hey, what are the critical things? And the smart thing is to list critical things that your organization is particularly strong in. And so that happens. It happens quite often. In fact, back on the sales side, one of the go-no criteria can be is if you feel that your main competitor has written this RFP for the customer, they've been in there and helped them kind of draft it, because you can see that they're asking for very specific things that organization has that nobody else does. And then okay, they're the only ones that have that technology, so it must be, and it's kind of like a foregone decision, because just because a company issues an RFP and says, hey, we're going to buy this, doesn't mean that they already don't have, their company policies say you have to, anything over X amount, you have to issue an RFP on, but it doesn't say that you have to treat all the responses evenly, right? They might have their company that they want to buy from, but they have to jump through the hoop of doing the RFP. So in our case, with one of the companies I consult with, MemoQ, which is the translation software provider, they're SOC 2 compliant, and they're the only one in the space. And if we see an RFP, or if our competitors see an RFP that says that this is a hard requirement, they kind of already know that where the decision's going to go. How about you? I'm just curious because you said that with Vengreso, you haven't done an RFP for 7 years. A bit at one of your previous organizations, you had an amazing success rate doing RFPs. Why have you decided not to participate in RFPs?
Time. And actually, to be honest with you, I could probably think of maybe less than one handful of RFPs that have hit our desk in the last 7 years. I think it's less and less and less that's actually happening. And those that did come our way, we opted to not participate because it was not a good use of our time, since we didn't have a relationship there at the account. And spending the 15 to 20 hours writing out answers, we didn't have a repository of content and data. It would all be custom written, right? That the first time or second time. So, it just didn't make sense. But we're talking about less than one handful, there. Now, if you go back to, going back to what the question I asked you of, like, hey, people say don't communicate during an RFP. Like, this is the only people. One of the techniques that we used to utilize a lot, and it worked really, really well, and especially if you're listening and you've got sales engineers that work with your sales team, what we would always do inevitably is we would have the sales engineers begin reaching out and connecting on LinkedIn, as an example, and or begin messaging their counterparts. And that allowed us to always have like plausible deniability. So if something came back, be like,
it wasn't me.
Yeah, it was like, what do you mean? Are you serious? You're upset over my network engineer reaching out to a network engineer to ask a question and clarifying like, come on, And so that is a way that you can use network engineers. And in fact, at the organization I worked at, we didn't call them sales engineers. They weren't called sales engineers. They were called network engineers or customer engineering. And so that's so that we could avert any type of individual who may not be, who would be perceived as part of the sales team that would get into trouble. And that's the global accounts that I used to have. And so there was a very specific reason why we did that. So we would use that a lot in terms of the workaround. And at the same time, there were occasions where we may not have had a relationship, but in most cases, you knew an RFP was coming down the pipe, right? If you were working at such a large company, that they were telling you usually 3 to 6 months in advance that an RFP was coming. And to your point, that's where the real selling actually begins. Let me help you write your RFP. And that's where you would get involved with procurement early on. And you would say, hey, listen, I'm here to help. I've got a whole RFP template for, and you fill in the blank for these types of services. Do you want it? And of course they would say, yeah, let me take a look at it, right? And so that's like the feather in your cap, the one up that you would get. And then you would, hand those things over and as new stuff came out, you would, tell procurement and let them know so they can include that in the RFP in terms of content. So I think that, there's some ways that you really want to get around that and companies can be able to manage that process. But something you mentioned, let's talk about the process of going through the RFP and the process to be able to do that. You talked about what are some process tweaks that can help in responding to these type of document requests? What does that mean? Talk about that.
Okay, so typically, especially with small and medium-sized businesses, they don't have a dedicated RFP team. So you might have a BDM, business development manager, salesperson, will receive an RFP, and what do they do? They'll run back and they'll say, "Hey, I've got this RFP. What do we do?" And the sales manager might say, "Well, what do you think we should do?" And well, let's go for it, because every salesperson should be kind of have that optimistic hat on, that mindset, and so they like to do it, and they'll lobby for it, and there's no real no go criteria, right? And so one of the first steps is, okay, when you receive an RFP, who is going to make that go no go decision, and what are the criteria? Just get that written down and just follow that. That's step one. And the go no go can be based upon, for example, are there any key factors or requirements that we don't have? And if we don't have them, is there a workaround? Okay, do we need to get a call with the customer and ask them, we're not going to meet that exactly. Would this be an acceptable workaround, right? And if they said, no, we need SOC 2 compliant. If you don't have it, you're out. Well, that's kind of making the decision for you, right? That's kind of like a no-go. The other thing is you want to look at, is this customer, have they been with the same provider for, how long have they been there? Is this kind of just an exercise to renew them? Or are they really looking at switching? So there's other criteria, but you need to decide who's going to make that decision and how they're going to make that decision. Then typically what happens is if you decide to go forward, you will take that document, and in a lot of organizations, you have one person trying to figure it, to respond to it. But as I mentioned, you got, information about the company, about finance, about your security, about, any kind of environmental, social, and governance issues. And typically there's not one person, especially a salesperson, who knows all that. So they have to start sending it out. And who do they send it to? Well, it sounds like kind of common sense, but you should have a pool of subject matter experts. And you could say, these three people can answer any questions related to finance or, the company, I guess, legal questions, so on. And if this person's not available, then immediately it funnels down to this person, and that person's not available because somebody's on vacation, they're on a business trip, etc. Then it would go to the third person. Get that all documented and in place, and just follow that process. Collect all the information, and you'll start to sort of, bring it back together. So those are like, pretty, what's the word? I would say commonsensical, process outline, but a lot of organizations don't do that. Every time an RFP comes in, it's like what do they call it? A fire drill. Everybody's running around. We got the RFP. What do we do? What do we do? And that causes a lot of stress. The other thing is when you send a document to a subject matter expert and they've had to complete something very similar a month before, and you're unable to reuse that contact, the reaction is actually is frustration, borderline anger, because they're like, dude, I'm helping you out. I've just done this like 3 times before, 3 different RFPs in the last maybe 6 months. Why are you asking me to do this again? Well, it's because the questions are a little bit different. We weren't able to capture the information. I could probably go copy and paste, but I might have to modify it, blah, blah, blah. So if you can kind of remove that sense of ad hocness and that fire drill kind of mentality and make things and let the subject matter experts know what to expect and work with them, so you can say, like, look, we are going to take all the previously used RFPs and we're going to create a repository of all those answers. And so I'm only going to come back to you with something new. So we're going to take this out, create the process, share that process with the team, and explain how they're going to benefit. And immediately you're going to shift the dial from frustration to appreciation. And my experience has been those subject matter experts are much more willing to support you if they see that they're not going to be asked to kind of just duplicate that effort all the time.
I'm smelling a conversation about AI coming into this in terms of making the process or tools more efficient. Making the process more efficient with AI tools. So talk about some of the tools that can help make the process more efficient. Clearly, you talked about the people, even having an RFP manager, right, that can help manage this process for you. I think that's something that's very important. But talk about some of the tools that can be used to help make the process more efficient.
Yes, so tools like Breeze, there are others out there, but typically what they'll have as a minimum is a way to store any previously used responses. So when was your company established? And our company was established in 2004. You get another questionnaire a month later, and it says, when was your company created, or when was your company founded? Similar question, a little bit different, but your database should be able to kind of understand using natural language processing, should be able to understand this question and this question are basically the same, so that answer that we used before should be appropriate. So if you can use some type of repository like that allows for kind of an intelligent search of similar answers in the past, and of course the example I gave you was a very simplistic example. Some of the questions can be much more complex, but if it allows you to search for those answers and offers you a chance to either use them, modify them, or create something new, that would be kind of step one. Then where you start to have other applications of AI is you might have previously used RFP documents that you've stored, but you could have other documents related to the company, maybe all the software documentation. You could have a link to a URL that says, here's all of our documentation. Here's our privacy policy, our MSA agreement, any kind of legal documents that you may need to reference. And you can ask the RFP platform to search those documents for answers to those questions, okay? And so that's where you start getting into, again, a stronger use case of the LLMs, large language models. And then the third aspect, and some platforms maybe just have one or two elements, and some platforms will have all three. The third one is you say, okay, look, we don't have an exact match on the questions that we've submitted before. We've got something similar. We looked through all these reference documents and we don't find the exact answer, but let's use AI to go through and draft an answer. And so typically then the RFP manager go through a question, and they might get three different choices. One would be direct response from the database. Another one would be a direct response from reference documents. And the third one would be looking at both of those and AI drafting a response. And as you know, because with FlyMessage.io, if I write something, I might not have the best marketing spin on it, right? And so because you don't want to just answer the questions, you kind of would like to put a little bit of shine on it, make things look a little bit nicer. In terms of you can promote, don't have to be over the top salesy, but you should package things in a way that definitely highlight your strengths and the benefits of your platform, whatever you're selling. And so the good AI tools can do that, can help you to do that as well, as you know, right?
Yeah, that would definitely help improve. So are you saying then with tools like Breeze, not that and everybody knows I don't do blatant plugins of products or technologies, but because we hadn't had this topic in 270 episodes, which is also 7 years, by the way, just as an FYI.
That's amazing, man. Amazing. That's just awesome.
It's been 7 years, and maybe it's because I was I decided that I needed to stay away from it because I have like some sort of like PTSD with RFPs. But can platforms like Breeze take in all of the past RFPs, index them using AI, right? And understand the questions. And then as I bring in a new set of questions, it starts taking all the past questions and answers and trying to create these answers for me, so that it makes it a lot easier. And now really what I'm doing is I'm reading through the content as opposed to having to write and read.
Exactly. And there's just three different ways of coming up with the answer. One is a direct or a very similar question that has been responded to in the past, or an exact match of that. One is just looking at reference documents and using AI to kind of extract the information. Imagine you have a 10-page long security policy, and they ask you a question about what are your password policies, and I'm a sales guy. I don't want to dig through this 10-page document here. The AI part of the tool can do that. It'll just look at the tool and instantly come up with the appropriate answers if they're in the document. And then the third one is actually rewriting what it finds into a more appropriate manner. So yeah, you got it. Another key element is the the ability to to collaborate, use the platform as a collaboration tool, because as we discussed, you need to involve these subject matter experts, right? So I don't want to have to email this questionnaire to 5 different people and then get their responses, or if they do respond, and then bring it all back and kind of consolidate everything. What I would like is an online platform that would send the SME an alert. They'd click on it, and it would take them directly to the questions that they need to answer. And if they want to see the instructions or the bigger picture, then they can do that, or they can just answer the questions. Maybe the questions have already been have been answered by the platform, but I just want them to validate these answers, because maybe the information might be a year old, 2 years old, right? So, hey, Mario, we've got this RFP. Could you just check these answers to see if they are fully accurate at this time? And then you get the message, you go through it, say, yep, click, boom, done. And so there's no emails back and forth. It's all, working on the platform and that kind of real-time messaging. And as the RFP manager, I can see, hey, Mario has completed 70% of the questions I asked, or he hasn't opened it yet. Maybe I need to send him a reminder, etc. So it just makes the whole process much more efficient.
So it's amazing what AI can do in terms of helping us speed things along and impact essentially this particular space. Let's talk about winning RFPs. I mentioned to you, I've got 100% hit ratio on RFPs. I never lost one. A lot of that had to do with the fact that we were building relationships way earlier, and also the RFPs. Actually, I take that back. I lost an RFP. It was a $45 million contract, I think it was. I lost the RFP, but a month later won the whole thing back.
Wow. So how did that happen? How did that happen?
Oh, it's a great story. I love it. So I'll tell you the story, actually, and I'll try to be brief because we only got a few more minutes here. But it was the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, and they went to RFP because the CEO made a mandate that they needed to do 20% cost reduction across the entire enterprise. And
I love it when CEOs come out with, they're like, okay, here's the idea. Here's what we're going to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's why I get the big bucks, so
everybody's got to reduce it. Otherwise, c'est la vie, right? So we got the RFP, and it was being run by the new chief procurement officer, who was a business guy, not a technologist. And so we were doing network services for the company. And they took it, network service and wireless services. And so it was about a 6-month-long process. We were one of the incumbents, so they actually had 3 relationships with all of the providers. We had the largest lion's share, which was about, in this case, it was about a $30 million contract that we had. And they said, hey, you got to cut your prices. What had happened, however, was the 5 years prior to, we had done custom software development to integrate our ordering systems with their SAP Ariba system. And we were the only provider to connect those 2 things together. Now, the other 2 refused to do that. And as a result, because of where people lived and better coverage in terms of the wireless side, they had to have these other 2 providers inside there. And so they would always push us, which is how we got the lion's share of the business. So they came out and they said, here's the RFP, you got to hit this price point, and it's got to be a reduction. And the other providers started coming in and they said, yeah, we'll make those price reductions. Well, now, mind you, this was a $30 million contract. And I was the global account director on this. And I had everything from our president, and we're a Fortune 84 company, by the way, at that time. From our president, direct report to the CEO, involved in the whole entire, process. And so I told the finance team, we don't have to hit that price point. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, we had to get to this price point, but we don't have to get to this price point. And they said, well, why do you think that? And I said, because we've already spent, I think it was like $7 million in terms of total integration costs. And I said, what they're forgetting about is that in order to make this worth it, the other carriers would have to get to a lower price point than the target in order to be able to offset the cost of them doing development.
Mm-hmm.
And the other carriers were staunch. They weren't going to do the development. And so that was a key requirement. So I told the CIO that, that's not going to happen, and that we weren't going to hit that particular target. And he's like, man, you got to get to the target. I said, there's no way we can do that. We've invested too much money into doing the back end integration, and your team is not, remembering this. So process went through. We got notified. Letter. Chief procurement officer called myself and our president and said, hey, you've lost the deal. And right before that happened, the CIO called me on my cell phone. And the CIO was a direct report of the CEO, and he called me and said, hey, just want to give you a heads up, man. Because we had a relationship. He came to my wedding, right? It went to Madonna concerts, took them, all that type of stuff, him and his wife. And he called me up the day before we were going to get the announcement. I just want to let you know, you lost the RFP. And he's like, I told you, man, you had to hit the price point. I said, shoot, how could we have lost the RFP? And he's like, pricing. I said, all right. So I said, I'm going to call you back. So I gathered my thoughts because I was in shock because this was a big one. This was my job, right? Called him back and I said, I want you to ask him 2 questions. And he's like, okay. And I said, question number 1, how are you going to get the other carriers to integrate into SAP Ariba? Because you got 120,000 employees that have bought off on this process and this integration that we did. 120,000. And I said, and secondly, ask them, hey, by the way, what's the cost that the carriers said they will eat for the integration? And he's like, those are some good questions. And I said, the first one, they're going to tell you that they're not, it's not included. And the second one is they're not contributing any dollars and cents. So he said, I see where you're going with this. And I said, okay, ask him. So president calls me up. He's like, are you kidding me? You lost a 30. I was like, hold on, just sit tight. He's like, what do you mean sit tight? I said, I just got off the phone with the CIO. Let him out, ask these 2 questions. And he's like, are you seriously putting this all on the line with these 2 questions? I said, I'm seriously putting it all on the line. So he walks in the next day, kid you not, they're on the executive floor. It's the C-suite. And he tells me the whole story, right? And he says, walks in, pokes his head in the office, says, hey, we're calling him Bob for the sake of anonymity. He says, hey, Bob, well done on the RFP, man, and saving, 20% off of the networking infrastructure costs. That's millions of dollars. Bob says, hey, thanks, Randy. Appreciate it very much. Yeah, it was a long process. I'm really sorry that, Sprint, our incumbent, that we're losing him. He's like, yeah. He's like, hey, well, just good job. So he says he walks out of the office and he counted like 10 seconds. Then he turned around and he said, I decided to pop my head back in. Hey, by the way, 2 questions for you. When will the carriers have the integration into SAP Ariba so that it supports all employees? And how much are they contributing to that cost for the integration? And the procurement officer says, what are you talking about? And the CIO says, what do you mean, what am I talking about? And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. He says, what do you mean you don't know what I'm talking about? And he says, I'm sorry, SAP Ariba? And he's like, well, you did look at this and consider what the impact would be to remove 120,000 people from ordering these services from this carrier, right? And he's like, I need to go back and look. I'm sure we did. He's like, okay, all right, good.
It's
like,
making me sweat just right now because I can imagine being in Bob's seat going like, oh my God, did I miss that?
Bro, it was such a great story. And he says, you didn't forget this, right? And he says, okay, well, let me know. He's like, and by the way, we need to make sure that that's developed and that they will have it in time before the switch out of the contract. So, since the contract is expiring in the next 6 months, the whole entire application would have to be developed. And he goes, hey, by the way, CIO says to the CPO, well, do you know how long it took Sprint to be able to develop the solution for us? And he's like, no. He's like, yeah, it took him about 2.5 years to get it all integrated. So I'm positive that the team has considered this and that you factor that in. He's like, so just let me know the answer. So he waits another 24 hours. CPO comes in and says, we didn't consider that. And he says, well, you better consider it. You better consider it. So turns around and the CPO says, well, is there any way you can, work, help us work Sprint down because they didn't hit our targets? And he's like, well, how much is it going to cost? He says, well, the other carriers, after it was a couple of days, the other carriers said they wouldn't do it. The other one said it'd be like $10 million. And he's like, well, who's going to pay for that? And he's like, well, we would have to. And he's like, are you kidding me? Then there goes the savings. And so he said, well, I guess you got to go tell Sprint that they didn't lose the RFP. So he calls me up and he says, you had it all planned out, didn't you?
Well, I mean, that's a great example, great story, and a great example of really, digging in and understanding what the key requirements are and making that go, no go decision. And in fact, if you put yourself in the competitor's place, they should have done a better job of that go, no too, because they say, hey, if we're not able to, somebody's gonna have to pay that cost. And if it's not us, it's going to be, your company. And what are we going to do in that scenario? So that's a great example.
So funny so 5 years earlier, we were a little flea on the elephant's butt in terms of total spend. And so one day, this is how it happened. One day I went in for a meeting and I was talking to the wireless telecom administrator, and I went into his cube to talk with him. And I kid you not, Mark, he had stacks of paper that were about 2 feet high, and it literally covered every section of his cubicle. And I was like, my God, I had no idea what they were. I said, my God, like, I've never seen such a desk like this. What are all these things, man? And I just asked a question, just like, an individual seeing someone's cube, right? And he goes, these are all the wireless orders. And I said, wireless orders? And I said, you're manually doing all of them? He's like, yeah, they have to manually, and they were faxing them in to the corporation, right? Faxing them in. And I said, oh, these are the ones that you've processed. He said, no, these are the ones that are still waiting to be processed. And I said, how long does it take you to do a stack? He said, I can do a quarter of a stack a day. And I'm like, you've got like 15 stacks here. And he's like, yeah, that's why it takes a month to 2 months to get a wireless order. So I said to him, I was like,
look at all the money you're leaving on the table there.
I was like, whoa. So the next day, I called up one of our, we called a BSP, a business service partner. And I said, hey, man, I got an opportunity for you. I was like, I'm going to go in and offer to sit there and enter wireless orders and key in orders. But I need a system to be able to make this fast, right? If I bring you in and give you a cut of the revenue that we're doing, would you do this for us? And he's like, absolutely. So a couple of days later, I go back to the office and I say, hey, man, would you like me to help you out with this? And I was like, I can take in the Sprint orders and the separate the Verizon and AT&T ones, and I'll take care of all the Sprint ones for you. And he was like, seriously? And I was like, yeah, I'll enter them into the system and get the orders out. And he's like, absolutely. So I literally sat there, and that turned into literally almost a 1 year long process. 3 days a week, I would go in and I would just start taking the orders from the stack and doing them myself until I said, there's got to be a better way. And the manager at that point said, hey, could you integrate directly into Ariba SAP? And then I call our business service partner who was working with me. I said, could you do that? And we spent $7 million on the integration. And they did all the integration, and we were paying them a commission. And they're like, we'll take it out of the commission fee. And turned into a $45 million contract for over 3 years. So it was a great way to do it. And that's how we ended up getting, because that the person who was entering them kept telling everybody, don't pick AT&T. It'll take you 2.5 months before you get your phone. Don't pick Verizon. But if you pick Sprint, you'll get it within a week. And then all of a sudden, everything shifted over the course of a year to Sprint, because we were inside there processing orders. And that's how it happened.
It's a great story. And what I love about that is, classic sales, you found a problem and figured out a solution, and people buy it. That's what people buy. You go in and help them fix something that's broken.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, enough about my story. Let's close the last topic, which was tips to win more RFPs. I mean, obviously my story could have some tips inside there, but what are some tips that people can?
I'm going to leave you with one. I'm going to leave you with one that I'm going to borrow, or I received from Lisa Rihurek. She runs the RFP Success Company, which is basically a consultancy that help companies and organizations win more RFPs. But she told me something that I hadn't heard before. She said, one of the big things about responding to an RFP is understanding what the competition is offering, especially their pricing, and because if you can kind of get in a sense of what their key advantages are, what their pricing, you know how to better present your offer. And for a lot of public organizations, city, county governments, state governments, the federal government, different organizations in the federal government, maybe it's the Navy, or a lot of those organizations are required to show you past RFP responses if you file a Freedom of Information Act filing. And so you can go in with a Freedom of Information Act filing and see what the previous awards were, what the amounts were, what the competition has provided. And for me, always you're trying to figure out what's the competition going to do? How can we price this to be a little bit more competitive? Yeah, so anytime you can get that competitive intelligence is going to help you, and it might help you in the RFP, but it'll also help you when you're out on the street going head to head with those competitors as well, because you understand more about the competition. So that's my tip for the day, and thank you to Lisa Reharick for sharing that with me originally.
There you go, tips to win an RFP. We gave you quite a few actually during this show. For those of you that are responding to RFPs and RFQs, and those of you that are getting them. They can be a beast, but you can win business out of them. And I can assure you that in my career, although I haven't responded to any in the last 7 years, just because of manpower, I can assure you that when you're working with a company that accepts that RFP and you take the time to really understand, just like Mark talked about, to understand how to win and develop a sales strategy, RFPs can be very successful, and you can win some nice coin out of that. So all of you listening in, hey, make sure that you focus in on learning to win that RFP, RFQ. Mark, fantastic discussion. Hey, tell us if someone wants to get a hold of you and talk about Breeze and some of the technology you guys are bringing forth to make it easier to be able to win RFPs, RFQs, RFIs. What's the best way? Mark Schreiner at LinkedIn, on Twitter?
You please just reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Mark Schreiner. There aren't too many Mark Schreiners on LinkedIn. And then if you type in breezedocs.ai into LinkedIn, or in just search it up on the web, that's breezedocs.ai. And then you can reach out and if you're interested, you can get a demo or have a meeting. The other option would be come and listen to the Grow Fast podcast, because we've got people like Mario that come on all the time and share their knowledge and wisdom. So that'd be the best way.
And Mark, I got one last final question for you. Your all-time favorite movie, what is it?
So that's a tough one, but I'm going to say that the movie that I think there's two movies that are the best 1-2 punch in Hollywood history in terms of, because usually, the sequels are kind of a letdown. But my favorite all time, up until the second choice, well, share with you, has been The Godfather 1 and 2. Incredibly, I think the combination of something like 8 Academy Awards for both of them. They both won back-to-back, Academy Awards for Best Picture, and several other awards as well. Amazing movies. The one that kind of compete with that it is Lord of the Rings 1, 2. But Lord of the Rings is the trilogy, so you have 1, 2, and 3. All really well done. So there was no letdown. And gosh, now you got me thinking on that sci-fi track. I just finished the second Dune movie. I got to say, Dune 1 and Dune 2, the more recent versions that have been out, are pretty darn impressive as well. How about yourself? I'm curious. I got to ask you, what's your favorite movie?
Bro, you're going to laugh. My favorite movie of all time is I'm a kid at heart, and I love aspiration. And so, and I love visions and dreaming. And you're going to laugh, but it's The Goonies.
Awesome. No, but okay, let me ask you, how many times have you watched it?
Oh, 1,000 times.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Like, I love that movie. And it's just like, the vision and the dream of trying to solve a problem as a kid. And it actually puts the lens of, you see a problem that parents are having and you want to help and you want to try to solve that problem for mom and dad, because, that's what it is. And then of course there's the whole fun of the escapade that they went on. But nonetheless, that was my favorite movie. This was about yours. You had quite a few inside there, and I haven't seen Dune 2 yet, but I will be seeing that. For all of you listening in right now, hey, don't turn that down quite yet. Listen to this vital message. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Oh, and don't forget, if you'd like to save 20 hours or more in a month and increase your productivity, go right now and download Fly Message, that's flymsg.io, for free. It's your free text expander and personal writing assistant. Hey, thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.